Welcome, everyone, to Bold Calling. This is Orum's monthly webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us. We are excited today. We are talking about selling with data science. A couple of housekeeping things before we get going. We love questions. You can use the Q&A portal at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit any questions that you have for our experts. We will answer them as we go, and if we don't get to it, we'll have a Q&A section at the end, so we'll make sure we get to all of your questions. This is being recorded, and I will send it out to everybody who registered by end of day tomorrow, so you feel free to share it with your colleagues if you like. And then where are you in the world? Let us know in the chat. It's always fun to see where everybody is coming in from. And I'd like to invite you to join us next month, October 19th. Our next session is going to be on the state of sales development. I'll drop that link for you in the chat. What's really exciting is that this is based on a proprietary report that we did with Qualtrics, where we talked to 1,000 sales leaders. And so it's all about like the state of the industry and the findings. So that should be pretty interesting. So yeah, definitely join us for that. Let me drop that in the chat for you there. Awesome. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Lou, who is the CEO of InsideScale, helping to make life easier for sales teams all over. And then from Orum, we have Aaron, who's an enterprise account executive, one of our top sales reps, here to share all their expertise with you guys. So Aaron and Lou, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome.
Likewise.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm going to hand it off to you, Aaron.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll just like really quickly introduce myself. But I'm Aaron. I'm an account executive here at Orum. I've been in SaaS sales for about 12 years. I was one of Outreach's first customers back in 2015, managing sales development at a company called Greenhouse. And just in general, very passionate about the discipline. Really enjoy my work, and happy to share all the information so we can all do a little bit better. That's a little bit about me. And then maybe a last thing, over the last couple of years, I worked with hundreds of customers and made about almost 20,000 cold calls, 1,200 connections, and approaching my 200th meeting. And so when you do something that much, you start to form a perspective on what works, what doesn't, and data is definitely a big part of that. Maybe Lou, it'd be great to just introduce yourself real quick, and we can kind of get into the data.
Sure. Louis Petrossi, founder, CEO at InsideScale. We are a sales development agency, and we stand up or level up SDR functions for SaaS and SaaS adjacent companies. We've built or overhauled sales development at something like 75 orgs and counting. And we love Orum, we love cold calling, nerding out on data. So excited to be here and share what we know.
Awesome. So I think one of the like a really easy place to start, and a common question I hear is, how many data providers do you need? And I think there's no singular answer for that, but I was just kind of curious, what is your perspective on, how many data providers is enough?
Sure. The answer is yes. You always want more data. So we tend to mash up 1 to 2 to 3 data sources per client. But maybe before we get into that, we should talk about how to get the most from your existing data provider. Because I think you and I see that over and over again, where folks don't have their fields set up properly and pushing into their sales engagement or in their Power Dialer / Orum. So maybe we start there.
Yeah. So definitely when I speak with a lot of prospects, what happens often is people will say, oh, I've got ZoomInfo and I have a 2% connect rate. And that is actually almost an automatic tell for me that some of the configurations are incorrect, or field mappings are missing. So as an example, in order to get it, let's just say you're using Outreach or SalesLoft, in order to make sure your reps are utilizing all the data that's coming from ZoomInfo, particularly mobile phone numbers, LinkedIn profiles, there are mapping from ZoomInfo to Salesforce and Salesforce into Outreach. And then if any one of those field mappings are broken, you're basically just missing out on data that you're already paying for. But I know there's some other details that are important for you. I would love to kind of hear about some of those other details.
Sure. Well, you nailed it. So the first step is splitting your phone fields. There's the corporate headquarter number, mobile, and direct dial. So make sure that you have 3 separate phone fields for your existing data provider. Step 1, super obvious, but a lot of people miss there. And then that needs to push into your outreach or whatever your SEP is. Their names for phone fields are a little funky, right? It's like work phone, mobile, VoIP, other. I don't think it really matters how you map that. You just need to understand what your internal naming conventions are. And then another trick is ordering those phone numbers in terms of importance within Orum, right? So call the mobile number first, the direct dial, and then lastly, the corporate HQ. So very basic, obvious, but a lot of people miss that step and complain about having bad data when in reality, you can get a whole lot out of ZoomInfo or Apollo. And depending on what market you're calling into, that could be enough, right? These data providers, they tend to have strengths on certain personas and segments. And there's no way to really know which one's best unless you already know from past experience. But very often you're going to have to test different data providers to figure out which one has the biggest coverage over your addressable market.
Yeah, and so just to kind of double click on that, I was actually speaking with a large publicly traded SaaS company, and I had 2 data providers, but they're reporting roughly like a 2.5% connect rate. And it was kind of a curious thing to me. And basically what we uncovered when we started looking at all the configurations is that let's call it data provider 1 was mapped to the mobile field, but data provider 2 in Salesforce, and then data provider 2 was also mapped to that same field. So when people exported from ZoomInfo into Salesforce, oftentimes the additional mobile phone numbers weren't being mapped. And so you're either, oftentimes you can have settings to not overwrite data, so then no new phone numbers are actually being pushed over. But ideally, you have data provider 1 to the native mobile field in Salesforce, and then data provider 2 into a custom field also in Salesforce. And then you're not done, right? You still have to then uniquely map those fields in Salesforce into your sales engagement. And then the labeling of those numbers in their sales engagement platforms don't necessarily match the names of the data providers, right? I think which oftentimes can cause some confusion. As an example, in outreach, you could go Zoom in, or data provider 1 to mobile, and then you need to go perhaps data provider 2 to other phone. If we really kind of want to get into the nitty gritty there. But if you don't do that, you basically are either overwriting existing data or you're just not getting the data over there, but consuming credits at the same time when you're like when you expose some sort of mobile phone number. And so I think the point of that story is like this happens at small companies and large companies, and oftentimes I think the people who set it up aren't intimately familiar with how the calling workflow works. Sometimes the managers themselves aren't intimately familiar with the back ends of some of these systems, and that's where the field mappings get broken, and we're just not leveraging, getting as much out of those data providers. So I think so it's like step 1, get the most out of your data providers, like get your field mappings in order. And it's not just mobile phone data. We also want LinkedIn profile URLs, easy thing to consume from the data providers that make it easy for reps. But I think there's also behaviors that reps can engage in that can actually improve data, and it make it more of a team sport. What kinds of things have you seen work in that regard?
Yeah, before we dive into that, I just want to reiterate how what you said was so important, that you need to split these phone fields between different providers. Just like you split, the first 3 phone fields from your primary data provider, you have to split these different fields and make sure that they don't overwrite one another. And then outreach has a limitation where you can only have 5 phone numbers right now. I think some of the other sales engagement platforms are different. So yes, you need to, we always recommend enriching with a secondary data provider because no one data provider has it all. So we enrich with Lucia quite often when a client has Zoom info, and there's always a delta of like 20, 30% more mobile numbers that you can find on contacts that you couldn't otherwise dial with mobile or direct. So you could have 2 or 3 data providers. You need to make sure all those different fields are split, and then you need to pick 2 and push those into those outreach fields. And again, the order of importance matters, right? So if it's Lucia plus Zoom info, it's mobile direct, then work phone number. So just wanted to stress how what you said was very, very important. Don't overwrite fields, separate them, and then push them into the right mappings and outreach and order them correctly in Orum.
Yeah. And
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was just gonna say is like it makes the way it sounds like it's super nitty gritty, but all of this work takes like 15 minutes. Right?
It's not hard. Yeah.
It's like so easy to create the field. The larger the company you go, the more political it is around adding custom fields in Salesforce, which I understand. Your workaround on that is to use, there's an other phone field native to Salesforce. There's a home phone field native to Salesforce. Just add help text to that. So you like properly label it, I think is like the hack if you're at a large company and getting like those custom fields built is difficult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And then your question was, now that we have rich data flowing into your sales engagement in Orum, how do you verify this data, right? There's so much data. What do you do with it? It's simple. Outreach and Orum allow SDRs or AEs, whoever's dialing, to verify the accurate phone number when you get a connect. You have to install rigor across your team to do this. It takes a village to validate data, and we implore every SDR and SDR leader on this call to be good data citizens for a number of obvious yet really powerful reasons. When if the number's right, you can go back and retouch that account. Super obvious, but what happens often in SaaS sales is territories change, your accounts get shuffled. So you don't want to inherit a bunch of dirty data and have to do all that heavy lifting yourself. So highly encourage everybody on this call to be good data citizens and, mark that phone number green or /valid whenever you see it. And
right.
Then you probably know more about this than I do, but there's a lot of Orum feature functionality that helps with this over time as well.
Yeah. So there's basically 2 things that that can be done from the rep perspective, which is each time you connect, right? Just to kind of emphasize what you're saying, there's a green dot, red dot feature in Outreach that allows you to individually validate numbers. So I connect with the prospect, I validated that I've just called Lou. It is indeed Lou. I mark it as green. If you use Orum, you can also use that feature regardless of the sales engagement platform that you have. And then the end result of that is when I go in and I'm making calls, a large percentage of my phone numbers are marked as green. And so I'm able to create sequences that are just entirely built around prospects that I have validated phone numbers for. Now, was that the case 2.5 years ago when I started at the company? No. But 2.5 years later, so this is definitely like an investment for the long term. And that's why it's important for the leaders to make this a behavior pattern, because it's hard for an SDR maybe to see 6 months ahead of the, past kind of the immediacy of what they're doing. But now I already know if I have a good number or not. I don't have to re-consume a credit from Zoom Info or Lead IQ. I just know that someone in the past has spoken to this person and validated. And oftentimes it was me, sometimes it was an SDR, sometimes it was another rep that was working the account previously. And it saves a ton of time. That's the I think that is the point that and it helps me build sequences where I am almost guaranteed a much higher connect rate by engaging that behavior. So that's the behavior that reps can do. The other thing that you can also use AI. And one of the cool things that Orum does is when you are dialing through a list and Orum hears a voicemail that is matched to the prospect's name that is appended to the metadata of the activity. And so it gives you another opportunity to create lists that where you'll have a higher connect rate. And so if you can, whether or not it's a human or artificial intelligence, if you hear a voicemail name match having a call disposition, even if you don't have Orum that says, voicemail name match, you are it's a super easy way to start validating some of your data, and their ops team can do some interesting stuff, but really it's for the reps so they can more quickly produce lists that will generate connections at the end of the day. Cool. So those are things that that reps can do to improve data. So I think one topic that I'm particularly passionate about is what are the things that ops folks can do to improve data. And one of the first things that I do when I'm working with prospects is to investigate call disposition. And call dispositions are basically the outcome of a call: no answer, went to voicemail name match, booked meeting. But there are some things that are not necessarily obvious that we can do to distinguish between the outcomes. So I think most people have a wrong number disposition, but you can also have a failed number disposition. You can also have a disposition to denote dial trees that don't have any sort of name directory, so that reps can see that that they can skip over a number like that. In the past, you can see that in the call history. And then of course, like name matches in voicemails is kind of the something that I think a lot of folks don't necessarily think to add as a call disposition. Whether or not you're using artificial intelligence or not, a human being can tell if there was a name match in the voicemail, and you should log that. So just that kind of like an important detail for operational folks not to skip over. Granular dispositions are a good thing. I think sometimes, I don't know, Lou, if you've ever heard this, oh, we've got too many dispositions. And I've actually found that SDRs, and I've worked with probably 1,500 SDRs over the last couple years, a long pick list isn't their problem, right? They actually do want to see precision in the dispositions. Do you, what are, agree, disagree on that? I'm curious.
Yeah, strongly agree. From a call coaching perspective, the more granular the disposition, the better. Was your permission-based opener rejected? Was it your elevator pitch? Was it your close? So we leveraged dispositions for that mostly. What you just described was next level from an ops perspective. So yeah, I'm going to have to listen to the recording of this call and try to implement that. But yeah. I think the more granular the dispositions, the better. And the primary drivers are call coaching, improvements, and then to your point, data hygiene.
Yeah. So here's another one that really gets me is no longer at company. Like, what do you do? And this happens all the time. I call someone, they're no longer at the job. They're no longer at that job. Super easy. Call disposition, no longer at company. Ideally, triggering a stage change in your sales engagement platform to no longer at company, so people aren't resequencing the same people over and over again who have moved on to a new company. I think that is just a huge time suck. But But let me give you some examples of other things that I want to know quickly as a sales rep. Have I booked a meeting with them before? Almost everyone has a meeting disposition, but I have seen people who don't have meeting dispositions. How about, can you follow up with me in 3 months? Some sort of follow-up required, right? Like, okay, so now I can filter in HubSpot Salesforce Outreach by everyone who told me follow up. And then, yeah, no longer with company, the types of ejection using a competitor, so you can target them in the future for competitive campaigns. And then in order to really make this fast and actionable, you need to tie dispositions to stages. So like the staging, you know, working, approaching, replied, and then as you get a no longer with company disposition, change the stage to no longer with company. As a, if you get a objection timing, change the stage to potentially not interested timing. You can, it really depends on how granular you want to get. But I found like staging to be, or is usually disconnected from dispositions, but super important for scale to have like the two connected. What have you seen on that front?
It's a good move. To be honest, I don't know if a lot of companies are doing that. The disposition to stage automation. So you're doing that with triggers and outreach and Apollo and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's a pro move, right?
Yeah.
I think it's something that folks don't get to quick enough.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding all of us of it. That's a good one.
Well,
Yeah.
and then the end result, right, is like I go into outreach and I just filter by follow-up. Super easy. And then one thing that I love that I think is from a workflow standpoint, and then, you know, this isn't necessarily about mobile phone and LinkedIn data, but it's just about data to keep track of people, which is who are the people that I need to follow up with and when. And right now you probably find that reps, calendar invites, spreadsheets, when really this can all be done within your sales engagement platform through, and most of it can be automated through staging and disposition. And then, but having some sort of follow-up task associated with a follow-up disposition also seems like a good move.
That is a good move. Can you automate that too? When you,
yeah, you could, in theory, yeah, you could say like, yeah, on this disposition, create a call task. The only thing you lose there is the ability to set that call task at the exact moment in time that you want to. That's the only thing you'd lose there. But you probably could set the time to be like some generalized time, 1 month from now, 2 months from now. I believe that capability
right.
exists.
Maybe better to just do it manually.
It's super easy, right? Just like go to the
easy.
prospect, add tasks,
Yeah.
throw the time,
Put notes in, right? Yeah.
exactly, put the notes about the conversation. And then I always say like those follow-up tasks are, you can shake the money tree the most there. You have more rapport with those people. You write everything down about that conversation so that when you actually, you know, they were dropping off their kids, they had some sort of budget objection, you have more rapport. And if you can bring that, they'll remember you better if you write all those details down. And I find that I book a lot of meetings from the follow-up bucket.
Yeah. Call is much warmer at that point, right? When you have the info, you follow up. When they ask you to, you reference that information. Yeah, follow-up pipeline's a huge part of the game.
So one of the things, so we talked a little bit about, you know, when I go into my outreach in general, I'm easy to find people it's easy for me to find people I need to follow up with. I have validated numbers for me. One of the other things, and this is a trick that I learned from you 5 years ago, probably, we were way ahead of the curve, where it is like intelligently using tagging, in like in a structured way. So persona tags, relevance tags, industry tags, and I'll kind of explain why we want this stuff, but I'd love for you to give more detail on this, which is one of the big challenges for reps is to stay within a consistent talk track. we can use sequences to keep people in a consistent talk track, but that always requires the rep to manually add them to a specific sequence. What happens if I want to quickly create a list of I sell to sales development leaders? How can I really quickly create a list, find those people already in outreach with validated numbers, and then add them to a sequence? What are some of the tricks that you're using with tagging to be able to quickly organize prospects?
Sure. So yeah, to your point, keeping your talk track organized is everything. And it's a very different talk track if I'm a rep at Orum calling a VP of sales versus a director of sales development. So super basic tagging that likely everyone already knows about is persona tags in outreach. And you can filter by those tags in Orum, and you can organize your call blocks by persona. That's step one. We like adding industry tags where it makes sense. If you sell to multiple industries or multiple categories of SaaS like we do, your story, you're going to have a brand story within those industries or categories. So that adds another dimension to what you can say on the phone when you have your battle cards or your customers that you're name dropping, for example. So just splitting it up by persona and industry tags, that's the first step. And you should be able to, without very much effort at all, organize your talk tracks and your pitch just with that move alone.
And then just to kind of help out the audience, what are the tools that you use to append tags? Because we can add them manually, but I know there's like awesome like SalesLoft, HubSpot, Outreach, Apollo, they all have the same functionality to be able to automatically append the tags. And in Outreach, how are you appending tags?
Yeah, we do that through the data upload process. So super easy to add an extra column in that spreadsheet when you're uploading it, persona. That'll automatically tag it. Same thing with the industry. You might need to do a little bit of extra work if you have granular industries like we do, categories of SaaS. So that way we can keep the success story name drops relevant. So that information will largely come from your data provider and maybe from your ops persona or whoever's doing these uploads, if it's your SDR leader or even SDRs. That's pretty easy to get in, the basic tagging. Now, if you want to get more granular with enrichments, there's a bunch of different tools that are available to do that. We use Clay to enrich account data and kind of chop accounts into cohorts of relevance. Folks with headcount growth in a certain department or hiring for certain roles. You can get those extra data points imported when you do your imports. And then that helps you customize your talk track further. I mean, obviously it depends on what you're selling and what relevance tags mean the most to you. But common ones are like department headcount growth, hiring for certain roles. Do they, like sales team size, like ratios of SDRs to AEs, things like that you can enrich and really customize your pitch. The more account relevance tags that you have and the more persona relevance tags you have, the better. And there's so many other ways of grabbing this data. We use a tool called Try Prospect that syncs at the custom field level with Salesforce. So it's very easy to get like new role, recent promo, mutual connection, like all of those fields into Salesforce, and then those push into Outreach and Orum. So there's a lot of different ways you can get this information, and you just need to make sure that you have as much as possible at the account level and at the persona level.
And so just to make sure I'm understanding that, so let's just say you have headcount growth, like that's a field that you're getting from a data provider. It's getting pushed to Salesforce. And then in order to get it to like a SalesLoft or Outreach, you're creating the list initially in Salesforce. Is that correct?
Yeah, we push that in
Salesforce.
Yeah, you always want like that information. So on the account level, you want to have account relevance fields.
Got it.
And at the contact level, you want to have persona, whatever you want to call it, personalization tag fields. Yeah. And some of those will date over time, right? So you kind of got to like get it in and work the data quickly. Yeah, and then to your point, at the sequence level, the sequence usually has a theme of relevance, whatever it is, new role, recent promo, you're a competitor of one of our customers kind of thing. So that should give you some relevance themes for your talk tracks as well.
Yeah. So another trick that I like to use that is a possible in Outreach, Salesloft, Apollo, HubSpot. In Outreach, you use triggers. In Salesloft, you use automation rules. HubSpot, I believe they're called workflow rules. And then in Apollo, they're called plays. Right? I think I got that right. Yeah, they're called plays. And so one thing that I found to be super helpful is to use persona tags based upon the titles. So you're like, if the title contains X, automatically appends this tag. Now you have to get, and I'm getting into the weeds here, but it is important. So like if title contains development, and I sell to sales development folks, okay, append append the tag SDR leader. Usually you have to start, there's like always some exclusion rules that you need to add, and all of the systems have the capability to say, but don't do it if they have this word in it. So you basically just have to play this game of like the contains logic in the in all the systems, and then all your tags are just automatically appended. So as reps are adding people from ZoomInfo or Apollo or wherever they're actually adding their data from, the tag is just automatically appended. And then later on, reps can just go in and like, all right, I want to find everyone who is X persona. Search, add, super easy. Rather than kind of like the one, and then it's also available for future reps to know that, right? Whereas when a rep adds one person into a sequence that is persona based, it's known to that one rep at that time that it is that persona, but in the future, that information is lost. So I think that's the kind of like the extra benefit of putting in the effort of using tagging. What about like promotions? What is the, like, I don't see a way to do that in mass. That's really done just like, I'm grinding on LinkedIn. I see that they've been promoted. Do I append the tag to like a promotions list, basically?
You do. Yeah. You can get that info on LinkedIn. There are two separate searches. I forget the filters off the top of my head, but something like they joined the company less than a year ago. There's a way of separating new role versus recent promo on LinkedIn. I can't remember the exact filters right now.
Yeah.
But essentially, if they've been at the company like longer than a year and they've had a recent job change event, that equals a promotion. And if it's less than a year and they've had a job change event, it's usually a new role. There's probably some more granular filters I'm missing, but you can certainly bucket those out and upload those. Now, automating like the account relevance and the persona relevance tags are harder. But your point about automating persona tags and industry tags, that should be automated unless you have like a dedicated SDR ops resource that you trust on those uploads. But you reminded me of a really good point. A lot of reps and SDRs are manually adding data kind of, sporadically throughout the week. So you definitely want to have those guardrails in place for like as many automated tags as you can create through triggers, plays, workflows, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, some of the data you have to go out and search, and you have to massage the data via spreadsheets and then get it into the system with the right tagging in place.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about like what SDRs have time for. And like in the ideal world, an SDR walks into their sales engagement platform and they can just go. I think the problem is like that's hard. It's difficult to just go and have nice clean lists all the time, validated phone numbers, perfectly appended persona tags. And so the more the business can do to to remove some of those obstacles, then you get you'll get more consistent activity, and ultimately get the more like predictable revenue growth that everyone is seeking, I think.
You have to do both. So like we deploy like SDR operations and data operations resources to our clients, and that's part of our service. And, we've been doing this so long that we really nerd out on data and folks know what they're doing. And even with dedicated resources, and a lot of people don't have dedicated in-house resources, right? Like there's a sales ops or a rev ops person. There's very rarely an SDR operations / data ops team. And that is the dream, that these, teams that don't really exist, that often feed SDRs every day, every week, but somebody needs to do that. If it's the SDR leader working in collaboration with sales and rev ops, somebody needs to feed the team consistently, but that very rarely is enough. So you need to also create processes where SDRs have autonomy and they can self-source data, high quality data, and keep themselves going when they're in a pinch, right? So
with guardrails,
with guardrails, right? So yeah, you have to, yeah, right. And how do you do that? Well, usually it all starts with pushing into your CRM. You've got all of these different fields mapped properly. Ideally, the SDR doesn't have to be a data ops wizard to execute those workflows. One cool workflow that is emerging is you have a lead scraper that pushes into Salesforce, and that will come with its inherent set of phone numbers, usually 3, right? And then you can use Alucia or an equivalent to automatically enrich for the missing phone fields. Again, those are separate phone fields, but that's not a very difficult motion to pull off. You have to be careful with your enrichment rules. I've seen companies burn entire instances overnight by not having that calibrated properly. So caution, right? Like there's a little bit of risk with that workflow. You have to have it perfectly set up, but it's not too hard to push data into Salesforce, automatically enrich it with a new set of mobile numbers. Then you've got your 5 or 6 numbers that you want to push into outreach. And, it's very easy for the SDR to push it into outreach, have that feed into Orum. So that's the dream, right? And then, so you want to build something like that where folks have autonomy and it's high quality data feeding into all the systems, feeding through all the systems. But then very likely, we know at the end of the day, sales development, lead generation is an activities game. So you're going to need some type of bulk data operation as well to really feed teams that are going for it and making lots of dials.
So I have one comment, and I think maybe we can just kind of just quickly run through some of the points we talked about earlier, just to bring them top of mind, and then we can go to some questions. But the last point I wanted to make on the bulk enrichment, yes, people expend their credits. It can be an absolute nightmare, but I also know the opposite. Whereas people think all this enrichment is going on in the background, but it's not. And because the filter conditions are too onerous. Do you see what I'm saying? I've seen both situations where it's like, oh, it looks like we've only been enriching marketing leads this entire time that have some sort of marketing lead source. And I think I've seen that on a couple different occasions because oftentimes marketing owns the budget on Zoom info enrichment. And so they're like, oh, well, yeah, we want to make sure it's just ours. And so the entire time people are thinking that and look, you've got to be judicious with your credit. That's an obvious thing. But sometimes people have the perception that this enrichment is happening in the background, and it's not because the filter conditions are too onerous. Okay, so just to kind of really briefly kind of go over some of the topics we talked about is optimizing your configuration. If you have a 2.5%, even 3% connect rate, and you're using Zoom info, likely you are just the mobile phone data is just not making its way all the way to your sales engagement provider. If you have 2 sales engagement providers and you're there, then you're probably overwriting data, or you've not separated the fields, and or one of those mappings is broken between either the data provider and Salesforce and your sales engagement provider. And so you've got like a whole bunch of different fields that you've got to check to make configured. So we talked about that. We talked about the things that reps can do to improve data, which is number validation. If you speak to a prospect, mark it as green, available in outreach, or if you're an Orum customer, doesn't matter. Super important for resequencing prospects and overall like lifting your connect rate. And if you lift your connect rate, you're lowering the number of required calls to get to a book meeting. Things ops can do for good data, like good call dispositions, wrong number, failed number, voicemail, name match, super easy to do. A robot or a human can choose that disposition. And then just ultimately like being more effective over the phones, which is, you know, we use persona tags, industry tags, and relevance tags. So our talk tracks, it helps reps. Reps can't flip back and forth between talk tracks. They need to stay in a consistent talk track. So that's kind of like the overall summary. I think we wanted to leave some time for some questions.
Yeah, we did. We've got one in the chat here from Alex, and it's a little bit technical. But yeah, if anybody else on the call has any other questions, please feel free to send them on in. Alex is asking, do we know if marking it green in either Orum or Outreach, if it will talk to the other? Like if I mark it green in Orum, would it automatically make it green in Outreach?
Yeah, 100%. Bidirectional sync between Orum and Outreach. You mark it as green in Orum, it pushes over to Outreach. If you mark it as red in Outreach, Orum won't even call that number. And then even if you don't use Orum and a rep sees a red dot next to it, they won't call it. Important that we don't delete the numbers, that we mark them as red. I see this a lot in sales law. If they don't have any sort of individual number validation, you get young reps. And they're like, oh, I don't like this number. They delete that number, and then someone else adds that number in 7 months later or something like that. And then you consume another question or credit.
Got it. Cool. I'm just going to launch this really quick poll here for everybody. Let us know if you want more information about InsideScale or Orum or both or none. That's fine. Just let us know. We'll follow up if you want to. And then a question I just have sort of as more of a layperson, and maybe for you, Lou. So what do you see companies making, like what's the common mistake that they make like when you're brought in? Is there like what's like a thing that you're like, oh, let's just really avoid this, like that companies are making when they're setting this all up?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of the granular mechanics of things that are typically not optimized, you know, fields being split, pushing properly. I think the biggest mistake is underinvesting. So very often, you know, clients that we see and other companies that we advise, they don't have enough data. Like even if it's one data provider, it's usually not enough mobile credits, for example. And then a lot of folks, and there's an entire consolidation movement happening right now, right? Everyone's contracting their tool purchases, but for data, that's likely going to, you know, shoot you in the leg, right? So people underinvest in their primary data provider, and then they're hesitant to add on other layers, other new data tools as enrichment. And no one data provider, they all have different strengths. So try Prospect, greatest, highest email accuracy LinkedIn scraper on the market. Lucia, really strong on mobiles. Zoom Info, like system of record, like thousands of accounts, marketing-esque features. So I think the biggest mistake is underinvesting in data in general. So one is like, how do you get more out of your provider? But very often you need 2 or 3, and you need to look at it as like a Venn diagram, and that's what is actually going to help you reach your total addressable market.
Awesome. Cool. So we're at 45 minutes here. I don't see any other questions coming in, so we'll end it here. Thank you both so much for spending this time with us and sharing all your expertise. Appreciate it. Again, everybody on the chat, I will send out this recording by end of day tomorrow, so you can revisit all those nuggets of advice and implement them in your own systems. So thank you both very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks all.